Hello there again, and welcome to the MCS strategic analysis for Montel in the August 2018 sitting. You're with Joseph Bowen at Astranti.com, and we are going to go through all the business models that are relevant for your exam success in regards to Montel. So, what are we even working with? Well, the camera industry, and this industry is in a very complex situation due to a number of factors, as you will have seen in the pre-scene. Various amounts of competition, indirect competition from smartphones, very sort of drastic consumer trends and demands changing. So, just in case you're not an expert, we are going to go through it and apply these models. I suspect nobody is a particular expert in the camera industry, or neither was I until we did the research. But, as we go through, this will be very, very relevant to your exam prep. Montel is a leading multinational camera manufacturer, and they are aiming for that premium sort of benchmark in the industry. So it's very, very interesting, and it gives us a lot of sort of already foreshadowing of the key issues. For example, production quality, any issues there could be a problem for the brand, stuff like that. But let's not get ahead of ourselves unless you've already watched the pre-scene videos, in which case you'll have heard me ramble all about it. So the first thing that we need to think about is the rational model. So the business environment and how it's impacted is also how we look at, just in general, our strategic analysis. So we compare our mission and objectives with our stakeholders and governance and ethics, and we contrast that with our overall strategic situation and the sort of forces affecting that environment, PESTEL, 5 forces, and of course we then have to look at our SWOT and how the value chain and internal analysis can interact with that. So the first stage is to ensure we know where the organization is heading and what it wants. So this is going to predominantly cover that premium benchmark sort of aim, that innovative, high quality aim that Montel mentioned in the pre-scene. So if we were looking at a balanced scorecard, we would see that they're looking for a number of different aspects, and this will link into the strategy. Their strategy, of course, is that they want to be a high quality premium camera manufacturer. So on the financial aspects, we will be looking for profit, return on investment, cash flow, good gearing, that kind of thing. And also on the internal section, we will want project management, sort of a low amount of problems with transactions. We want on-time production and services, job success rates, and also employee satisfaction. Under budget figures would be great also. In terms of the learning perspective, we can look at how many recruits come in, training projects, hours spent on training, staff retention, that kind of thing. And from the customer perspective, we can look at products sold, number of complaints or sendbacks, customer satisfaction, and of course, how much stuff did we sell to customers. Governance, however, is an interesting one. We didn't get too much on it in the pre-scene. However, we did get a mention that it is an important topic for Farland, the country in which this company is based. So what we know from the pre-scene is that it's a listed company, therefore it will be duty bound to implement governance. It has a lot of subsidiaries and a divisional structure. So in this regard, we will be looking at what kind of CEOs are in place, that kind of thing. And when we looked at it, we got a predominantly well distributed governance in terms of the makeup. There were some non-executives, there was no sort of similar surnames from a family perspective. However, of course, given that governance always has this agency problem in most cases, we have to think about the potential for it to arise. And interestingly, we didn't get any mention of audit committees, remuneration or nomination. So it's something to think about regarding governance. However, if you haven't watched the top 10 yet, or are planning to, already have. Just in case, spoiler alert, this is not the biggest issue for the pre-scene, but it's definitely worth keeping in mind that no mention of remuneration, nomination, or audit will mean that it could potentially come up, given that we know they're listed and duty-bound to implement these kinds of things. So the key ethics and CSR issues from the case are going to be reducing accidents and production, likewise pollution likely, sustainable sort of services or production in terms of like depleting the resources, any legal liabilities, and in regards to this depletion of resources / the sourcing of different materials, we're going to look at ethics versus profitability. For example, the electronics industry as a whole is sort of getting slammed sometimes for using sort of these unethical workshops that are in far out parts of the world with not particularly good human rights records and working conditions. Sacrificing some of that to reduce profitability but maintain your ethical stance is sort of that kind of balance that a brand orientated company like Montel will want to think about. Possible issues that could come up in a very niche way is professional ethics. As always, as an accountant, you might get a sort of curveball question about potentially overlooking something, and it's your duty to say it's not the right thing to do. You have to do it this way. Ethics is just correct. That kind of thing. Treatment of staff, redundancy fears. If they do have to cause redundancies, how they handle that and the effect on staff will be a key CSR issue. And as always, bribery is always unacceptable, but it's one of those niche things they could throw in, though in this case, I wouldn't bet on it. The critical success factors are particularly interesting for this industry, specifically Montel. They want brand recognition, for sure. That's like their main thing. They want to be premium, top of the range, and that does rely heavily on branding. And this will mean in sort of tandem that high quality and cost control are going to factor into that. We saw that there's low profit percentages from those premium ranges, so they've got to get under control those costs or sort of find a way to maximize profitability on those high-end ranges. And of course they need to maintain that high quality, otherwise the brand will suffer. They also have to be quite reliable products. Warranties are good and everything, but it's still a pain to have to send them back, for example. So them being reliable products is going to be critical. And this in turn will build customer trust. And the customer trust is pretty much the crux of how Montel can charge such high prices. The brand, giving off this vibe of quality and assurance relies very much on trust from customers. So, now we are on to stakeholders. They are the people affected by the business and its operations, so we need to think about this in the contextual sense. And of course, we're going to use Mendelow's matrix for this. Now, what kind of action we take to each stakeholder is dependent on where they fit on this matrix, if you recall. So low interest, low power stakeholders, such as the employees of suppliers and individual members of the public, and overall just suppliers, they're not going to be super interested in what the company is doing. They simply, in the supplier's case, for example, just want to have some business. They're not super worried in that regard. By contrast, you might have high interest, low power in stakeholders. So customers, minor shareholders, employees, environmentalists. They may have, a lot of interest, but not too much power. High power, however, is a very interesting situation. So you've got to keep them satisfied. That will be lenders and banks, national government. They have low interest but high power. And then you've got the super keep close issues where, the key players, the board, founders, regulatory bodies, large customers, you need to keep those people happy. So that's how Montel should, in theory, go about their stakeholder management. Their board, they want to keep those people happy. Management will want to, be looking at the profit margins and correcting any declines, which we kind of have seen. And obviously, large customers, perhaps a third-party retailer that buys extensive amounts of Montel cameras, they don't want to annoy them too much. So now we go to our rational model once again, and now we need to analyze the current position of the business based on, we know where it wants to be now and what kind of approach it has to take or will be taking. And now we have to look at what's the deal right now. So PESTEL, very, very interesting one. One of my favorites, actually. So the political aspects are going to be foreign government, so exchange rates, the economy, that kind of thing in Farland, global politics, and of course regulations. Not sure what kind of regulations would necessarily apply to the camera industry, but they've got some disposal sort of regulations that are typical in the EU, for example. I think it's called WEEE, as in literally WEEE, like going down a slide. That kind of acronym stands for, I think, waste, electrical and electronic sort of goods, and how they're sort of disposed of. It's quite important to not just dump them and cause some issues with the environment that way. Economically, of course, we have exchange rates, the world economy, and interest rates. This will affect, exports and imports, and that might actually put off some figures in regards to supply and distribution. Socially, we have to think about different cultures, what they want, any changing social trends. For example, we had the news clipping about fashionable accessories for the camera industry, and whether that's appropriate for a certain demographic and whether it's worth marketing that to them is dependent on social aspects partially. Then of course we want, apologies, that is the wrong word put in there, should not say vehicle, advancements in camera technology and information technology, because software and hardware are particularly relevant in regards to, of course, how the business goes forward. They can't be left behind on those kind of things, especially when they are aiming to be the premium sort of company in that market. So renewable energy in regards to how maybe the factories are run, I think it's like North Town, West Town, South Town, and their damage to the environment when they're producing, so waste products once again. And legally, there is the whole issue around health and safety, tax as always, one of the certainties in life, and different national laws, regulations, kind of as we mentioned with, the sort of political aspects. So now we come to the 5 forces analysis, which is very, very important to this case. So please take note, because this is going to be fairly, fairly important. Essentially, it's based around competitive rivalry, and how high the forces are dependent on the number of competitors, for example, little difference between products, competitors being strong, exit barriers, that kind of thing. And as we look at new entrants, it's like how easy is it to enter the market and how likely are they? Buyer power is dependent on like how large the customers are and whether they can switch easily. Supplier wise, is there alternatives? What is the cost of changing suppliers? And substitutes are pretty important as well. In the camera industry, it's quite a difficult one to approach in terms of a high quality camera could actually be replaced by a low quality camera, depending on the needs and desires of the customer. So it's a challenging one to think about, but ultimately smartphones are the ones that are going to crop up a lot here, and let's take a look. So, buyer power is pretty medium. There is, of course, a niche market in regards to these high-end cameras at least, and they are sort of the top range and sort of desirable products that Montel are putting out. They do have a camera for every market, but their specialism is this sort of premium and professional range, as we saw in the pre-scene. So this is kind of a niche market which increases the force, and of course, as always, buyers know that they're needed. Factors lowering the force is that there are quite a few buyers. We got mentioned a lot that there are a lot of enthusiasts, perhaps even some amateurs, and quite a lot of professionals that will be customers for Montel. However, this is kind of a tenuous mention because there are a lot of buyers, But are there a lot of buyers in comparison to, what we might think about compared to other industries? Perhaps not. So it's a bit of a loose one there in terms of lowering the force. Ultimately, we get a quite medium, perhaps even high buyer power, given sort of the cost of these products and how niche they are. Supplier power is also medium in this regard, because there's high quality necessary. Otherwise, Montel would not be able to put out high quality products. There's also a large competitor in Kira that have the similar style of branding and goal in terms of quality, and they will probably, take up any contract should Montel decline or, not work with people anymore. So suppliers do have another option. The factors that lower the force, however, is that, as with any sort of supplier, a large company and their contract means it's kind of unappealing to turn down sort of custom. You need custom as a business. So Montel being a major company, as well as having the potential to organise large ongoing agreements, is very unfavourable for the suppliers to not work in a reasonable way with Montel. As we move to competitors, there is a real issue here. It's really high force. There's large competitors, it's a mature market, and in terms of the different price ranges, there's a number of specialist competitors at each level aiming for very different aspects of that market and specialising in them. For example, we have companies such as Jola and Lem, for example, that have their very clear niche, and by having so many competitors with different niches, you kind of fall out into the wayside. You have your own niche. Montel's is that premium and professional range. However, those ranges aren't doing so well profit-wise, so these other niche sort of specialists are going to be eating up the remainder of the product range's main sales. So it's a very tough situation. Again, one of the factors lowering the force is that Montel is a major company in the camera industry, but honestly, this is a supremely high competitive force. In regards to new entrants, there is no legal barriers, so that kind of increases the likelihood of new entrants. The problem, of course, is that when you pair that with how many competitors there are, how mature the market is, how well served the market is in the various niches of these competitors, and the requirement of knowledge and investment being high, there's so many things lowering this force. So new entrants is quite unlikely unless it's a very niche and sort of off-the-cuff product like the action cameras from GoPro. When they sprung up on the scene in the early 2000s, they were quite a surprise new entrant because they weren't competing on the same metrics. Substitutes is a medium sort of power, and this is because the best cameras that Montel produce, whilst they are significantly better than substitutes, there are a number of easy to acquire or already acquired substitutes. Nearly everyone has a smartphone, so if you're okay with the quality of your smartphone's camera, you might not care for any camera, let alone a really expensive one. Likewise, if there are enough good budget cameras on the market, you may convince yourself as a consumer, even if you're particularly enthusiastic for photography, that your money is better bang for your buck, if you will, at these sort of more budget ranges, maybe a budget DSLR instead of these premium and professional ones. However, lowering this force is of course that Montel are amongst the highest quality products at every range, so that does help this to some extent. On the whole, the 5 forces are really quite high compared to most industries that we look at for the pre-scene. And this will mean that profitability is quite low, perhaps reasonable should Montel adapt quite well to these changes. But at the moment, I would suggest that, currently profitability is on the lower end of what they might have expected 20 or 30 years ago. It's a very difficult market to operate in, which is pretty much where I think most of the top 10 issues are derived from. This issue of many competitors and need to diversify, sensitivity of production compared to the sort of goals of the company, and how important branding is to those goals.
Hello, it's me again. I just wanted to take a few minutes of your time to first extend my hope that you enjoyed the free sample that you've just viewed, but also to just sort of explain what else Astranti do to help you pass your exam really effectively, provided you found our sample particularly interesting and insightful, of course. So, of course, we have a study text for every module, ranging from P1 to F3, and the certificate level is also free on our website. So we have study texts throughout the CIMA course, every module you could hope to study. The certificate level are free, as I mentioned, and then the rest of them, ranging from P1 to F3, are all available to purchase. Alongside this, if you're not so much a study text kind of student and you prefer a visual way of learning, we have the course videos. We essentially break down the study text into bite-sized presentations with a walkthrough, and it's a very, very, very engaging way of explaining the course. Following this, we have the pre-scene analysis, where we break down each pre-scene sitting into a number of videos, going through the whole document, but also adding a top 10 recommendations for what will come up in the exam, and also a strategic analysis where we put all the models you'd find in E2, for example, to the pre-scene itself, whichever that may be at the time. Alongside this, we provide an industry analysis. This is a document and accompanying video which help you give that contextual information in your exam. So, for example, if the pre-scene is on the oil industry, the industry analysis will break down the oil industry, the current topics, trends, issues, what the competitive market looks like, all those kind of aspects, all condensed into one so you can spend your time wisely in your study period. Following on from this, when you actually want to practice all this knowledge, we have mock exams for all of our materials. So StudyText has a generic mock exam based on the module, whereas the pre-scene analysis has mocks available to purchase that are based on that specific pre-scene, that are targeted to the key issues we believe will come up. And if you're not content with just doing those mock exams and practicing that way, we have a marking and feedback system where you can purchase the ability to send in your paper, have it marked by a CIMA qualified accountant, and get personalized feedback on whether you can improve X or Y area. And sort of finally, if you will, if you're feeling really underprepared and that exam is coming really, really soon, the master classes are offered by Astranti, and they're essentially a crash course in anything you could want for that topic. So if it's a master class on the pre-scene, it's going to give you absolutely everything that you could possibly need to know about the pre-scene in one really condensed sitting. Likewise, if it was the F3 masterclass, you would have all of F3 gone through in a very crash course style presentation and video link. You can also purchase it post-stream as opposed to viewing it live, all these kind of aspects. We are very, very confident that these materials will help you get the exam success that you want. So we have a pass guarantee. Provided you fill out a form which demonstrates that you have utilized our materials to a large extent and actually taken the time to study them, and you have unfortunately failed, we will offer you the same materials again for the next sitting as a consolidatory offer to ensure that you can get back on the horse and get that exam grade that you want. With that said, thank you very much for watching the sample video. I hope you enjoyed it and it gives you a lot of confidence in Astranti and your CIMA future.